Are you looking for some tips to create outlines for your writing? Hi there, my name is Brian Collins and welcome to the Become a Writer Today channel. So there are two different types of writers. There are pantsers who like to turn up and write about whatever's on their mind when they open up their writing application of choice. And then there are plotters who like to know what they're going to write before they actually sit down to do the work. I consider myself in the latter. In fact, I use writing outlines all the time for blog posts, for articles and for book chapters. I even use writing outlines to create video scripts like this one and to brief other writers who produce content for the sites that I run. Writing outlines help me produce articles, blog posts and book chapters much faster and much more easily. Outlining tips that I'm going to give you in this video and how you'll use them really depends on what it is that you're outlining. So you could create an outline for a plot or for a story that you're about to tell. So this could be an outline that you labor over and go into extensive detail on. Or if you're writing non-fiction, you could create an outline for the key acts in your non-fiction book. Tip: non-fiction books usually follow the 3-act structure and all of the key story points that illustrate the points in your book. Or perhaps you could create an outline for your character in your stories. If you're writing a blog post, you could knock up a 5 to 7 bullet point outline in just a few minutes. Or perhaps you're creating a content strategy for your website. Well, then you could use an outline to figure the key themes that you want to address in your site and the articles that fit under those key themes based on your keyword research. Or perhaps you're working with other writers. Well, then you could create an outline that covers the key sections that the article needs to address and then share this with other writers. So what you're outlining really does dictate how much time you're going to spend on the outline in question. So for example, if it's a blog post, I might only spend 5 minutes knocking up a quick outline before I sit down to write it. On the other hand, if I'm outlining an entire book, I might spend a few days or even a few weeks tinkering and experimenting with my outline until it makes sense. And I may even ask other people for feedback before I actually try to write it. So when you're working with your outline, there are no hard and fast rules. Keep it organic, but hopefully these tips will help you produce your outlines more easily. My first tip for you is to keep it simple. I want you to just get a pen and a piece of paper or potentially a packet of these, a packet of index cards. Digital software and tools are fantastic for writers, but when you're learning a new technique or something that's going to change your writing or creative workflow, it's good to keep it simple by using paper and analog tools. So what you're going to do is create an outline for your book chapter or for your blog post or your article on a piece of paper or on an index card. And you can do this while not connected to the internet, so it'll give you time to think about the key ideas that you want to include in your work. Then when the time actually comes to sit down and write that first draft, you can put the index card or the piece of paper next to your writing desk and you can get down to it. Later on, you can try out some fancy tools and software, and I'll cover those in a moment. But if you're new to outlining, just keep it simple. Use analog tools. My next tip for you is to use dedicated outlining software. And do this once you're comfortable with the outlining process. So there are 2 outlining tools that I recommend, and I've reviewed both extensively on the Become a Writer Today channel, so go check out those videos if you want to learn more about them. But the first one is free and it's pretty easy to use. It's called Dynalist, and you can use this to create outlines for your work quickly and easily. Now there is a free version which will do everything that you need if you're a writer, but if you want to, you can support the app for $7.99 per month, and it has some additional tools for productivity and so on. But you won't need this for your outlines or for what I'm about to cover in this video. These days, the tool that I'm going to use the most and the tool that I'll use for the rest of this video is called Workflowy. It's been around for over 10 years and it's a little bit more expensive than Dynalist in that you will probably need to upgrade to the $4.99 per month version if you're going to use it to create your outlines. But I'll show you in a moment why it's so effective for creating outlines for book chapters, blog posts, and so on. The advantage of using this type of software is that you can access it anywhere. So you could create your outline while you're down at the coffee shop or in the local library, or you could even tap out an outline on your phone or on your tablet, and then you can sit down and write it up later on. Personally, I use Workflowy the most these days to create outlines for blog posts and articles. When you're creating your outline, ask yourself, what is this article, blog post, or book chapter about? And you're going to create a single thesis statement that sums up exactly what you're about to say. So this single thesis statement is usually a sentence or perhaps 2 sentences, but it's going to tell you in advance what you're trying to write, communicate, or accomplish. So it really depends on what exactly you're outlining. So it could be a keyword. So for example, if you're writing a blog post, perhaps you have a keyword like the best software for creating outlines, and then you could write a thesis statement like, this article covers the best software for writing outlines. Yes, I know it's all very meta. Or alternatively, if you're a freelance writer and you're working with a client or an editor, perhaps they've given you a brief of what the article needs to accomplish. Well, that's going to sum up the thesis statement and give you a little bit of structure for your outline. Or with something that you're writing for your audience, perhaps it's an idea that you want to get across. So try and encapsulate that idea in a single sentence, and again, that will give you a bit of structure and constraint for your outline. If you're writing fiction, it could be a key point, incident, or scene, or a pivotal moment in your story. And the great thing about this type of constraint is it's helpful when you return to your index card, like I talked about a few moments ago, or when you open up your outlining software of choice, because it'll help you figure out all of the key points that you're going to include that build on accomplishing that thesis statement. Next up, pick 5 to 7 ideas for the blog post or article or even book chapter that you're outlining. So if I was outlining a blog post, for example, I will have an introduction and a conclusion. I may also have a piece of research that I want to cite or an interesting statistic. And perhaps there's a story that's going to illustrate my point or illustrate the key idea in the blog post. And finally, I'll have some takeaways for readers. I would also suggest that you have one idea per paragraph or per section in your blog post, your article, or even your book chapter. And the great thing about outlines is that they're organic, so you can move them around. So I'm currently using Workflowy and I can easily move around the key points for this section of the video script using this writing software. But obviously if you're using analog tools, you can just open up another index card and rewrite the key ideas that you're going to include in the article or the book chapter or whatever you're writing. Now the idea here is that you're getting a feel for the structure of what you're going to write without actually laboring intensively over the sentences and so on. Because you can do all that line editing and all that good creative work once you have a little bit of structure and once you understand what you're trying to say and what point you're trying to illustrate to readers. Next tip is particularly applicable if you're writing something larger like a series of articles for your site or perhaps a book chapter. So if you're creating an outline for a chapter, chances are you're going to end up with an index card or something that looks like this on screen. What I would suggest you do is create a series of index cards for your book or a series of notes or writing outlines for the articles that you're about to write. Then what you can do is lay out all of the index cards on your kitchen table, and that will give you an overall structure for the outline of your entire book. Or alternatively, if you're using writing software like this, you can move around your outlines and zoom in and out to see where they fit. But creating an outline in advance is helpful because you can figure out what the specific chapter or article is about, but you can also consider where it fits into the body of your work. This is particularly helpful, firstly, if you're writing a book, because then you can figure out the different acts in your book. And secondly, if you're writing a series of articles, because it would help you determine the key theme that you're going to address over a couple of weeks or a couple of months with readers. So do zoom out when you're looking at your outline as well as zooming in. Next, I recommend using verbs for your writing outlines. I have on screen an outline for an article I published on the Become a Writer Today site that's all about editing tips. And I use the same outline to record a video on that topic, and you can go watch that on the Become a Writer Today channel. But you can see here that I listed out the 7 editing tips that I wanted to cover in the article. And I started each one with a verb, because this really helped me write these sections much more quickly and much more easily. Now, I didn't worry too much about formatting it correctly or grammar or typo mistakes. This was simply information for me as the writer to produce the article and also to produce the video. I find using a verb is a little bit more instructive than simply putting down a word. Brings me to my next tip. When you're creating your outline, it's really just for you, the writer. It's not meant to go to your editor or for readers to see it. So although it's helpful to use verbs, don't worry too much about grammar, typos, spelling mistakes, there's one, or line edits. The outline is simply to help you figure out what you're going to say in advance and produce that article or book chapter much faster and much more easily. It's an upfront piece of work that you're going to do before you produce the first draft. Once you produce the first draft and once you're editing, that's when you can go and fix grammar mistakes, typos, and spelling mistakes. And it's only during the 3rd or 4th draft that you're going to start line editing. But if you do the outline work up front, all of this will come much more easily. When you're creating an outline, keep it organic. Move around the different ideas and the different sections so you can figure out where everything goes. So again, I have on screen the outline for proven editing tips. And I started with the idea that when you're editing, you should let something sit for a few hours before you write it. I thought this was a good tip to start with, but perhaps what if I got it wrong? While using outlining software like Workflowy, I can easily move this down my list. And of course, if you're using index cards, you could just cross it out and move it down organically or naturally, or you could just start a different index card. I also recommend using indents when you're creating your outlines. So again, if I look at the idea here that you should let a piece of writing sit, I have given myself a couple of notes or talking points for this particular video script. And I'm referencing how Joan Didion used to put her drafts in the freezer for a couple of weeks, I know, pretty crazy, before she sat down to actually edit them. And again, this is something that I would indent because it's not actually a key point in the article. It's just a note for me for something that I wanted to cover or something that I wanted to say. And again, why I like using software like this is you can indent in and out, and it can also collapse and expand these indents. Now, this is all particularly helpful if you want to give yourself a little bit more structure for your outlines. I don't often go to this level of depth for something that I'm working on. Sometimes it'll be just 5 to 7 key points, but if I feel like the 5 to 7 key points aren't enough, then I'll just indent and start tapping out or writing out more outlines for the piece in question. And again, I can indent indefinitely. So if I press enter here, I can do another indent and so on. So it really depends on how granular I want to go. Now, I mentioned that I'm using Workflowy to create this particular outline. And one reason why I like Workflowy, and again, you don't have to use Workflowy for your outline, but I can actually zoom in on specific sections and I can just focus on those if I'm writing a specific section. So let's say I'd written an entire book all about editing. It could be a book, there's lots of books about editing. So perhaps I wanted to have an entire book chapter about how to let your writing sit in a freezer before you edit it. Well, rather than looking at the outline for my entire book, I could just zoom in and look at the outline for this specific chapter. Now, obviously I would need to expand on this specific chapter before I could go ahead and write it. But again, I could zoom in on using the active voice and I could write down more tips for myself about using the active voice too. My 9th tip is to keep your outline beside you when you sit down to write your first draft. So it really does depend on what your writing setup looks like. Now, I know you can't see it in this video, but I actually have 2 monitors where I write. Typically on my left, I have my writing outline, and on my right, I have my writing application of choice. So I'll refer to the outline and then type up the article in question. But if I'm writing on index cards, I could potentially take the index card with me, go for a walk and refer to the index card and dictate that first draft using my outline. Or if you have a tablet, perhaps you could set your tablet up on your writing desk and then open up your laptop and review your outline while you go. But the idea here is that you refer to your outline rather than sitting in your chair wondering what you're about to write or say next. My 10th and final tip for you is to share outlines with other writers, if that's what they're for. So usually an outline is for you, the writer, but if you're briefing somebody else, you can use software to share an outline and give them a bit more information about what they should say. So you can do this easily enough in Workflowy. You just click on the 3 dots here and you can click on share, and I can share this particular element of Workflowy with a writer, and then they can refer to it and review all of the sections in the outline. And this is actually an outline that I shared with a writer who produced an article all about literature reviews for Become a Writer Today. And it has various sections, headings and subheadings that you should potentially use, and keywords. You can do the exact same thing with Dynalist. Or you could just type out your outline in Word or Google Docs and share that document with them. But having worked with dozens of writers over the years, I find writers love this type of thing because it helps them deliver what clients want much more easily, and you, as the person commissioning this content, will spend less time editing it. So I hope you enjoyed this content in this video all about creating outlines. If you do, hit thumbs up, and if you have any other tips that I've missed, let me know in the comments section below.